As soon as you start recording, I become like 50% less funny. It's a fact.
Just make sure I'm pronouncing your name right. Hang Shu, right? Like SHU kind of.
You can spend like 20 minutes just on my last name.
How do you pronounce it?
Shu.
Shu?
Shu.
Shu?
Shu.
Shu.
Yeah, sure. That's close enough.
All right, let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, then I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. Not just 5 stars, I'm talking about a couple sentences too. Apple loves that stuff, and so do I. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. This week's audiobook recommendation is Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High by Joseph Grenny, Carrie Patterson, Ron McMillan, Al Switzler, and Emily Gregory. And I haven't personally read this one, but this one came highly recommended by our guest today, Hang Shu. But Critical Conversations is a guidebook that equips individuals with effective communication skills, particularly for high-stakes situations where opinions differ and emotions run high. Not unlike salary negotiations, which is what we're going to talk with Hang about today. The book emphasizes the importance of having crucial conversations effectively and honestly rather than avoiding them to try to improve relationships and achieve desired results. And they offer some tools and some techniques to foster those things like open dialogue, mutual respect, and ultimately getting to outcomes that benefit everybody involved. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to start your free trial and download Crucial Conversations completely free and help support the show in the process. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So I've got a very special guest on today, somebody who you probably know through LinkedIn. Someone who I don't know really needs very much introduction. Hang Shu talks a lot about recruiting, hiring, salary negotiations, and just what's wrong with the recruiting industry today. Hang posts a lot of hot takes on the UX industry. He's even been blocked by a few well-known UX thought leaders. He's pretty famous on LinkedIn, maybe infamous, depending on who you ask. And if you don't know how to pronounce General Assembly, he can help walk you through that too. So I'm really excited to have Hang on the show today to help us talk about salary negotiations for designers. Hang Shu is the founder and the lead recruiter for Collective Supply, a talent-centric design recruiting agency based out in New York City. And before that, Hang was a senior staff UX designer at Boston Dynamics and designed the user interfaces and the workflows for their first warehouse robot. And Hang, don't let me forget to ask you about all those terrifying robots at Boston Dynamics. I'm really curious if you got to pet one up close. His experience in both doing hands-on design work and recruiting for design roles gives him a unique perspective on the state of UX and design hiring in the US. You can read his writings on design strategy, activism in tech, and salary negotiation techniques on LinkedIn. And aside from his work in UX design, Hang has a keen interest in film photography and enjoys tinkering with instant film cameras. And if you've ever wondered if there's a fully manual Instax Polaroid rangefinder camera, he'd love to chat. Hang, welcome to the show, man. It is so good to have you on.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. That was a 5-star intro.
Was it? 5-star out of how many stars?
50.
50.
No, 5 out of 5.
5 out of 5. All right. I like it. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I've had a lot of practice. So Hang, welcome to the show, man. It is so awesome to have you here. Tell everybody out there a little bit about you. I think you probably don't need much of an introduction, but there may be some people living under a rock that haven't seen your stuff on LinkedIn yet.
Thanks. Wow, this is like an interview. I still flounder whenever anybody asks me, tell me about yourself. So I don't know where to start because for a job interview, I know exactly what to say. For a podcast, I have no fucking Wait, can I curse?
Oh, you can curse.
Okay, I have no fucking clue.
I forgot to tell you that before. You curse, I'll curse, and then we'll both curse.
Well, or unless you beep it out.
I don't beep it.
Oh, nice.
We'll get the coveted Apple E on the podcast.
Nice.
So you just turned this into an E episode. Thank you.
Yeah. Holy shit. What am I? I guess I'm a recruiter now. So I tend to define myself based on what I do for a living or how I make money. which is a terrible way to define oneself. But I blame my Asian parents for that. So thanks to them, Mr. and Mrs. Xu. Yeah, I'm a recruiter now. I used to be a designer. And right now I do a lot of writing on LinkedIn. So a lot of shit talking, a lot of shit posting. That seems to how I get my jollies. It's fun though. It is a lot of fun and allows me to meet really great people such as yourself.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, I'm honored to be included in that list. I love your shit post, by the way. What really gets me, and I guess this is the best part about shit posting in general, is it really confuses a lot of people, and a lot of them think that you are being serious when you're not. And when someone says how to pronounce UX UI, UX UI, is that how you say it? I don't remember. I was like, how could you possibly think he's being serious? But the shit posting stuff, man, I love it. I actually, this is something I want to ask you. You do a lot of the activism like you talked about, and obviously you're very passionate about diversity and all these things. And I'm curious how you ended up getting to the point where you just so fed up with everything that you just like, screw this, I'm going to start shit posting. How did you get to the point where you got to be sort of like the satirical LinkedIn poster posting about stuff like this?
I think I got really frustrated with certain types of content that would dominate your feeds, right? Like the LinkedIn algorithm obviously definitely rewards a type of postings. And that type of postings tends to be, I don't want to say cringeworthy, but it's got a certain flavor to it.
It could be
It's a certain fermented flavor.
Yeah.
Kind of like those Icelandic, is it Icelandic? Like the Norwegian, the canned fish or the canned
fish,
shark.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like that. And it's horrible. But I think I started it when I got tired of seeing which UI is better.
Oh God, yeah.
And I decided to make some like two equally horrifying, terrible UIs and just letting people have at it. And there seems to be two camps of people who either really got it or people who just were like, both are horrible. Why don't you just do this? And then I would just kind of stretch it further, like, which way is a better dial pad for the phone? And I started to use the very traditional rotary dial.
Yeah, right.
To see like, hey, what about this one? And people started to kind of diverge further. Like more and more people got it, but there were always like a hardcore few who just refused to understand the joke. And I have a lot of fun with them.
You do.
They're getting rarer and rarer at this point, which is unfortunate because...
well, I'm sorry, because it seems like you did have a lot of fun. There was one you posted today. When this comes out, people probably won't even see it at this point, but you posted a chat, how to use ChatGPT for recruiting. And somebody was like, recruiters are valuable, and they were trying to tell you were wrong. And then you said something about, they need to spend more on good coffee or something. I laughed my ass off when I saw that.
What I should have said was they're obviously laying off more recruiters than non-recruiters within tech companies. And they're using that money for more important things like executive compensation, which is
that would have been a good one.
And also very much true.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the beauty of satire, isn't it? All right. So I'm curious, you used to be a designer and you were working at Boston Dynamics, which is fascinating on its own. And senior staff, pretty high up. How did you get into recruiting and what made you want to get into the recruiting game and leave the world of design behind?
I think there were certain push and pull forces for that. I think for a lot of designers, once you get to super, not even that senior of a level, you start to hit burnout pretty quickly because all the skills that you had as a designer, like creating really good interfaces and figuring out the strategy and doing usability testings and all that, like whatever it is that you used to do day to day, eventually fall by the wayside at some point. And instead, you're more focused on the politics. And this is what Peter Merhol says all the time. It's like, the skills that got you here will not take you any further, something along the lines of that. And it took me a while to learn that and figure that out because what I kept feeling for several years was, okay, I know I can do this work. I know I can provide this value, but I feel like no one is going to let me do that. And that's, obviously the wrong way to look at it because it's not about people letting you do these things, but you do need to spend more time and energy and, increase your skill set in figuring out how to work with others and understand them so that you can collaborate better and kind of push the trajectory of the product development process into a lane that is more cognizant of the user's needs and the needs of the product versus just satisfying the egos or the instructions of the select few. So I would say that's kind of like the push force, and also a lot of the just hitting burnout. I think I was very burned out. I think I'm still burned out, and it's been almost a year at this point. So that's one reason. I think the other reason is also being Asian American is, I would say, it's a double-edged sword in some ways, because early on in my career, I can distinctly remember how being Asian American was extremely helpful. So I would go to hackathons, and this is back when hackathons were really big, really popular, and it was a great way to break into design. And everyone was down to have me on their team. And the first thing people often say to me was, "Oh, you must be a really good developer."
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and I would disabuse them of that. And I was just like, "Hey, I'm actually a designer." But somehow they would translate my ability to do
Wow.
good work over to design. And I feel that part of it could be because I'm Asian American. There's a lot of, the model minority myth and the whole
Right.
association of, you are really good at technical work, technical
Like math
hands-on
or
work.
something. Yeah.
And throughout my career, I feel like people just always would assume that that's what I'm really good at. And
Oh, wow.
that's something I do pride myself on. But it felt like everything was going hand in hand. So me going from, a very early stage designer over to senior and lead level is very quick. It was just a matter of a few years. And I think in many ways I was over leveled at certain points, and I paid the price for sure. Like you learn some harsh lessons when you're not fully prepared. But at a certain point, you are prepared, and more of your work is focused on strategy as opposed to hands-on design work. And that's where it gets really hard, because strategy to me is about power. If you have power, you get to dictate the strategy, right? Like you almost never allow like junior product managers or designers dictate the strategy of a product or a feature even. It's like that's just unheard of, right? Like strategy resides within the powerful, or the circle of power, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets complicated, because I don't think most people are comfortable necessarily with. I have to choose my words carefully with this. I haven't like fully thought out this, but
Well, it's fascinating. I'd never really thought about that before, to be honest. The strategy goes with power, or power goes with strategy. Vice versa, right?
yeah.
It's kind of an interesting thing. Yeah.
But that's your expectation, right? Like as a lead level designer, staff or principal level, your focus should be on strategy and less so on, the incremental design work, because that's the leverage that you have, right? If you have the wrong strategy, no matter how good everything looks and feels, it's not going to turn into positive product or market outcomes. And you can have really good strategy and maybe mediocre, visual design and still get pretty far. Like there are instances of products out there like that. And I think generally speaking, like statistically speaking, there are fewer Asian American leaders or executives than there are for, I think, virtually any other race or background.
Really?
So
Wow.
it's like an inverse of how Asian Americans are highly paid and perhaps even over leveled at certain points. Take that out. Over levels are really, it's a sensitive term, but statistically speaking, I think Asian American men earn more than any other group of people. But
Wow. Okay. I
they're
didn't know that.
also the lowest statistically in leadership and executive level positions.
Wow.
So I think I personally was just really burned out. I think generally speaking, when I'm working at a company at that level, executive levels, it's usually white men. If there's
Yeah, I can see that.
diversity, there are some white women, but you almost never see any Asian men or women at that level. So just having your voices heard, being listened to, it's a lot harder. I mean, that's already a battle that I think a lot of senior level designers have to fight. And then you have that additional attribute on top of it, it's a lot harder. And I'm not saying this is, Asian Americans have the hardest path. I think being other PLCs is definitely a lot harder, but it's like an interesting combination where you're kind of used to having the road being a little bit easier in some ways, and all of a sudden you just kind of hit this wall.
Now, was that one of the impetus or one of the reasons why you ended up wanting to get into recruiting, was to break down that wall to help people get higher, help Asian Americans get higher, because you were seeing it sort of like leveling up, and they're leveling up quickly, and then they're stuck, and maybe they're leveling up too quickly. and maybe you could help them there. Is that kind of how you ended up getting into recruiting overall?
Yeah, I don't think, leveling up too quickly, that's a really sensitive term, right? I think I personally was leveled up pretty quickly, faster than I think was reasonable or I should have been.
Hmm.
And it forced me to also work super hard to feel like, hey, so I feel justified in being leveled at that place. I can't speak for others,
Sure.
but in terms of what I'm doing right now, I would say, I'm not at the level yet where I'm recruiting for executive directors or VPs of design. Like that's a whole different level. So I'm not really focused on that. But the reason why I really wanted to get into recruiting is because as a designer, as a candidate, I've just had so many terrible experiences
Yeah.
through the interview process and working with recruiters that either weren't great or border on unethical at times. So there were a few instances where it just made me feel like, okay, this needs to change. And one of them was, this is during COVID. I had hired a contractor designer through an agency, a staffing agency that I won't name here. And when COVID happened, we had to cut loose all the contractors. So we stopped renewing all contracts. And when we brought them in, at that company, I had been a contractor first before they transitioned me into a permanent role. And they had done that for many other people. So I said, hey, I know you're coming as a contractor, but we have a great history of turning people into full timers here. So if this works out well, I'm basically one of those managers or hiring managers who kind of overpromise a little bit. And when COVID happened, of course, we had to cut everyone loose. And in this case, this designer was on an OPT visa. That meant they would have to return to their home country if they could not find another company that could extend them the same opportunity. And this is the early days of COVID before the hiring spree happened. So that was pretty scary for them, I imagine. And I, went around talking to everyone within the company. Hey, can we please extend this person's contract? And this is a unique situation. We don't want to be in a situation where somebody's getting deported. Eventually, we kind of found the budget for it, and I was like, hey, I'll cut my salary to make this work because I feel responsible. And the staffing agency basically said there's a kill fee. And I said, hey, we're lowering their hourly rate to $30 an hour. They're not making money. We just want to help them stay here. Like I don't expect them to do a ton of work. And this is not about trying to squeeze out a little bit more money out of the agency. Like I understand we're all struggling a bit here during the early days of COVID, and they adamantly refused to lower their kill fee of tens of thousands. So that really pissed me off. And I said, hey, you placed me at this company. You made tens of thousands of dollars off me. I think they made like 50,000 off me or so. And I had hired, I think, 2 other people through them. So they're probably around like $100,000 in billing through just me alone. And they just adamantly refused at that point.
So what is a kill fee? I've never heard that before.
So a kill fee is when you hire someone as a contractor. They typically take a percentage of the hourly rate. And then if you want to transition them into full timer, then there's a kill fee.
Oh, the fee because they wouldn't get the money anymore. Ah, I see.
Right.
Okay.
So if you hire a full timer, you get paid you pay the agency like 20 to 25% of the person's base salary. So if you're hiring somebody at 150K, you're paying the agency about $37,000, $38,000. So they don't want you to hire someone as a contractor for like 2 weeks and you pay them a few thousand and then you transition them into a full timer. So the kill fee is there to make sure they get their nut too.
So you saw these unethical behaviors, things that you're talking about here, right? And so you said, I'm going to do this right. That makes a lot of sense. And I can see that coming through in all the posts and everything that you share on LinkedIn and the other interviews that I've seen with you and stuff. So I really appreciate everything that you're doing there. And we could talk about, I feel like there's a million things we could talk with you today about. We could talk about the shit posting alone all episode. The reason why I wanted to have you on is I see you post quite a bit about salary negotiations. And I feel like there's a lot of people out there that are terrified to negotiate salary. And I can tell you from personal experience, I historically was a very bad negotiator. It took me, when I actually got into software, I was making basically nothing. And I ended up getting a job, big giant corporation. And I found out 3 or 4 years in that I was making less than interns were making. And
Jeez.
it took a manager to actually fight for me. She really fought for me to get my salary bumped up to where my peers were. And, it's one of those things where I realized very late, unfortunately, that if you don't negotiate salary, it doesn't just hurt you once, it follows you. And you're constantly comparing previous salary to the next salary, like, oh, that's not bad. That's better than I'm making now, but it's still lower than everybody else. So it's kind of has like compounding effect when you're bad at this. So I feel like this is something I think a lot of junior UX designers, people who are transitioning, especially from other careers where they might be making less, on average than a UX designer might, they need this negotiation tips and tricks and tactics because I feel like people aren't getting it, especially at their boot camps. So that's one of the things I was really excited to have you on today. I'm curious from your perspective, things you've seen the wrong way. Most people, they'll approach salary negotiations. What's the way you've usually seen it go? And you feel like, I just wish people would stop doing this. Is there something that you've seen over and over again that it drives you crazy and you wish people would stop?
Yeah, I think. Are you a fan of Dante's Inferno?
You say fan. It's funny. My wife actually is a fan, and she got me a copy of it years ago before we got married. I honestly don't tell her, but I've never read it. So,
Oh,
go ahead. You had a point.
so there are certain levels of hell.
Yeah.
As you get deeper and deeper into hell, you have worse and worse offenders who are punished more and more harshly. And I think for salary negotiation, it's kind of like that. There's no like right or wrong way, but I believe there are different levels. And I think the bottom level is the person who just takes the first offer that comes along. And I don't say that to really denigrate them because I think we all come from different places. We all have different experiences, and I think salary negotiation is a very emotional topic for everyone. And I think I think every good salary negotiator has some kind of horrible origin story that propelled them, that motivated them to becoming better at it. And you kind of shared yours a little bit. You were making less than an intern for several years. I started out working for this woman who had a trust fund, and I was in the arts field, so you can imagine just how exploitative it was.
Sure. Yeah.
But for the entire 5 years I worked for this woman, she never once gave me a raise.
Really?
And I never asked for one either because I thought this is normal. And afterwards, when I had quit finally, and she brought in somebody new, and this person was making a little bit more than me, and they also asked for a new laptop, new equipment, because I have been using the same equipment for 5 years, same laptop and everything. And I was like, whoa, a new iMac. What's this? He's like, that's awesome. When did we get this? He's like, my boss was like, oh, no, you should have asked.
That's so crappy.
I was like, motherfucker, you tell me this now. And she had brought me back in to like help with some work because I had just recently left. But yeah, so the bottom level is people who do not ask for a raise. And the next level would be people who would instinctively ask for a little bit more. And that's the advice that's often given out on LinkedIn. Always negotiate, always ask for a little bit more. If they're hitting what you're asking for, you're not asking for enough. And it's true, but it's also so overwrought, or is that the word? Like, it's so pedestrian at this point. It's like, yeah, duh, like ask for more. That's not like, if you're a salary negotiation coach and you're saying that, you're probably not very good at your field, because that's like a dime dollar advice, it's there. And I think a level above that is people who learn the techniques of how do you ask for a little bit more? How do you receive an offer? How do you answer the question of what are your salary expectations? And I think most people, if you can just spend a few hours to get to this level, you're going to do really well. Right? You're going to make thousands of dollars more. And you're right, because of how we invest money, how capitalism works in the US and capital gains tax and everything, having that few $1,000s early on is cumulative. It snowballs. So the data, there's a Business Insider article where they show like 2 college grads, and one of them negotiated a little bit more money, like $10,000 more and like 3% more every few years. And the earning difference is about $1 million by the time they retire. So it's insane, right? And the way I suggest to people is you should not be thinking about it in terms of money, but you should think about it in terms of when you can retire and how much time and energy you're putting into it. Because my partner, she negotiated. My fiance, we're getting married in 3 weeks actually. But
congratulations!
Thank you. So by the time you hear this, we're probably married
You
by
probably remember.
no, I should say my wife.
Yeah,
She
there you
once told me, I was like, you need to ask for another $5,000 because you'll be driving a car and the tolls between New Jersey and New York is crazy, like $20 per day.
Jeez.
You should ask for a little bit more money. And she's like, it's $5,000. What is that even gonna do? After taxes and everything. And I said, you shouldn't be looking at it in terms of $5,000. That's an abstract number. But if I said that $5,000 means you can retire half a year or a year early, that's incredible if you think about it, right?
It's a lot,
So
it's
you should
worth it,
definitely be pushing for every single dollar. So that's like the third level, and that's where most people should be if they just spend a few hours to learn about it and practice, right? The return on investment for that is astronomical in my mind. And then a level above that is you start to see salary negotiation as not just salary negotiation, because most people think, hey, when you receive your offer, that's when you start to negotiate. But if you really see it, you start to understand that you start negotiating the second they ask you, what are your salary expectations? And that's the first call. And in fact, you're negotiating through the entire interview process because you're trying to establish value. You're trying to peg yourself at a certain level, which is attached to the leveling system, the high-end rubric, as well as the salary levels. And if you do it right, you start to realize that, hey, your portfolio is actually a huge leverage. So even before you interview, even when you prepare for it, when you think about where you go in your next career move, all of that feeds into salary negotiation, because it's not just salary negotiation is basically compartmentalizing something that is super all-encompassing. And that is your compensation and what that allows you to do in your life.
I want to dive into that last level, because that's the advanced level. Might not be able to get into all of it today, but I think it's really interesting. And that's something I definitely want to have some takeaways, some things that maybe some actionable tips people can actually start to do. But I'm curious, before we get into that, what are companies thinking? Like when as a recruiter, you have sort of an inside view into these companies and stuff and what they're actually thinking. What are companies thinking as they're going through this process? It's not just a random person giving you random numbers. There's probably some strategy there. What is it that they're trying to do?
Okay, so on the company side, it depends on who you are, right? You're the hiring manager, the recruiter, or somebody on the finance team, or maybe a higher up executive who has to sign off on this hire or this up leveling, for example. So your perspective changes as a result. For the recruiter's perspective, you're not so focused on, like, the numbers are just kind of an abstract concept, right? Like you're working within this level. Like you're hiring for a level 5 designer with, say, 5 to 10 years of experience and who can do X, Y, and Z. You just want to make sure that they're within this level or this gap between the bottom level and the top level of the salary band so that you can pass them. So they're qualified. So that's a qualified lead. You're kind of looking at it in terms of like a sales process or a sales funnel.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
As a hiring manager, you might be thinking about it a little bit differently, right? Because whoever is passed to you should be fully qualified. So you're not really thinking about where is this person. You kind of just know by default that this person is going to be within the band. And then things get interesting because as they evaluate you, they might realize, hey, we really need this person for X reasons, and they're going to solve this huge problem. So we need them more than we thought originally. So we need to think about how can we over level them a little bit, or it might just be a matter of what the market is like. So if the talent pool is weak and this person is really good, then you kind of need to think about, okay, should we up level this person, really get them into the fold? And then the reverse of that is when the market is really bad. So hiring managers right now, this is going to sting a little bit, but I feel like a lot of people on the hiring side have kind of a smug confidence right now because they know they can extend an offer that's non-negotiable and most likely people will take it. So all of that comes into play. And I think one framework that's really important that everyone should be considering is something called BATNA, which stands for Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement. And what that means is here is what the two parties will do if they cannot come to an agreement. So if you're the candidate and you cannot, sign an offer or agree to an offer, then you either stay where you currently are at the company, or you stay unemployed, or you take the next best offer. And then on the hiring side, it's like, okay, well, do we pick the next best candidate, or do we restart the search again? And how does that impact our product roadmap and what we want to get done and our deliverables, and how that impacts the the wider team in terms of the overwork that they might have to do and how that, impacts their morale. So all that should be considered as you negotiate.
So I'm curious, like about this BATNA. I've never heard this term before, but from your perspective, this is where you just mentioned like the hiring managers kind of have this smug sort of air about them because
Yeah.
they have a feeling if I gave you this offer, what idiot who's been looking for a job for 6 months is going to say no thanks? I'll keep waiting another 6 months. So they sort of put you in a position, I think, is what you're saying, right, where you sort of take the offer because you're desperate and they know it.
Yeah, I mean, during the interview process, you're constantly reading into the language and the not just like body language and not just what they say explicitly, but the entire context overall. So if you know they've been laid off, then they're probably burning through their severance or their savings. And at that point, any offer is better than no offer, right? And one thing that recruiters typically ask is, where are you in your interview process? Are you talking to other companies? We just want to know where you are so that we're within the timeline. And then, we want to be prepared to extend an offer if the timing is running down.
Now, are they asking that because they actually want to know that? Or are they asking that because they want to know if they're trying to compete and they would need to give you a higher salary or a better offer or extend a lower offer because they... I'm curious. I know I sort of have an outline of things I want to ask, and I don't want this to get lost. So I want to talk about this now. Are there people at these companies that care, or do you feel like these people tend to just be kind of thinking about their numbers? In this case that you just mentioned, where they're asking you about what other companies, or are you interviewing with any other companies? Where are you in the process? Are they asking because they care? Are they asking because they're trying to figure out how to lowball you?
Yeah, I want to be very straightforward here on this one specific topic, because if you read my writing and you kind of know me, you can see just how emotionally charged I am. And to me, there's like clear right and wrong. There's like good and evil in this, but really there isn't, right? People are working within a system. Like, I think the most important thing is when you're negotiating for salary is that you need to keep it impersonal. It's kind of like being a lawyer. If you're a lawyer and you lose your cool, you get emotional about something, then you're at a disadvantage. You have to focus on the facts, focus on the data. And if you're not doing that as a candidate or a hiring manager, then you're at a disadvantage. So I don't really ascribe to lowballing as some kind of a greedy tactic. It's a very subjective label that people have. But really, we're just within a market that's constantly changing, can be very volatile, and it's very emotionally charged because we're talking about people's compensation, their ability to meet the demands of their livelihoods, right? So are people lowballing when they ask that? No, not really. It's just, this is the interview process, right? Like, if you think about interviewing, it's a very cultural process. And a lot of it doesn't make any fucking sense. We are just doing it. Like, why do you ask the same 3 fucking questions when you get on the call with me? Tell me about yourself. Like, how is that a good question ever? But this is what we do now, right? So I really don't think we should be thinking about it in terms of, are they trying to pull one over us?
Okay.
And more, here's what they're trying to get out of this conversation.
Okay, so let's rephrase that question then. Yeah. If lowballing is a very emotionally charged thing, it sounds like someone's actively trying to screw someone else. But the point I'm hearing you make, and I want to say this, you tell me if I'm right. They are listening to these conversations and they're asking you questions, and the things that you tell them will then be taken, analyzed, and that will then determine their next move and what they might offer you at some point within the rules of this engagement.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you ever bartered for anything in your life, then you are reading into the greater context, right? Like, if you're any half decent at bartering, you would not just think about it in this minuscule compartmentalized scenario. You would think about it in the greater context. So me going to a fruit stand, I know if the fruit stand is about to close in 10 minutes, I can say, hey, I'm going to give you a little bit less, but I'm going to buy a lot more fruits. And that usually works. And if there are so many examples I can give that shows how if you just understand the context a little bit better and like what their motivations are and what their weaknesses are, you can obviously leverage that, right? So I see negotiation as kind of like a seesaw, and you want to be sitting on the far end of the seesaw to leverage as much weight as you can, and you want to bring more put more in your pockets, and that's kind of the force that you have. And if you can identify the weaknesses or the leverages that they have, then you can obviously use that to your advantage, right? So to me, it's like tying balloons onto the other end. So there's something like information asymmetry, which is a super important concept in salary negotiation. You want to protect your side so that they don't know just how weak you are, where your weaknesses are, so that they don't exploit it. And you want to know as much about them as possible. So doing background research, super, super important. And I think with something as important as salary negotiation, which has, outsized cumulative and long-term effect on your earnings, on whether or not you can enjoy life, you absolutely should be investing a shit ton of money and time into that research. And it's just shocking that people don't do that.
So when I hear this, the first thing I think of is like Sun Tzu and appear weak when you're strong and appear strong when you're weak. This is sort of, it sounds like a lot of it sounds like very similar to this type of environment.
People think salary negotiation is like this special, weird, unique thing that happens every time you get an offer, which happens like once every several years. And it's not. Like everything you use in this is leverageable for everything else in your life. I've negotiated my rent down using the same techniques that I would be using.
It's just negotiating, yeah.
Yeah, because it's all just about how can you create more value, right? And there's a lot of theories and reading behind it, but obviously the base principles are the same across the board, and you just need to filter it or mold it a little bit to have it be applicable for something like salary negotiation or buying fruits from a fruit stall or your rent or anything else in your life.
So that's a really great point. I think a lot of people do approach salary negotiations as some special thing. And what I'm hearing you say is, this makes a lot of sense. It's a negotiation for two people exchanging money for a service, whether you're the one getting the money or you're the one paying the money. More often than not, our UX team or people like us are usually the ones giving the money. But in theory, though, the negotiation tactics would apply to any kind of transaction of money in some way, where you can at least transact. So that's a really great point. That's a good call out. I really appreciate that. So I'm curious, we mentioned these various levels. Let's talk a little bit more about like tactics, like specific things, takeaway. If I listen to this episode, what are some things that I can actually do next time or this time? Maybe I've got an interview coming up and I got to start. Some things that you would advise people to start doing, like you mentioned, that first interaction or that first piece where they say, what are your salary expectations? I've often heard people say, don't give them salary expectations. Ask them what the range is and go from there. Maybe we can start there. What do you think about those types of tactics? Do you think that's crazy, or do you have some other ones that you think work better?
I think it really depends.
Okay.
As a designer, I love saying that. It depends, right?
Yeah.
Like we all love saying that. It depends. And I think the factors are, the market, your relationship with this other person. Can you trust them? Can they trust you? And also the kind of leverages that you have. So I think the general rule is you don't give the first number ideally, right? There's this common saying, the person who gives the first number loses or something. Like it doesn't actually work that way, but it's safer to do that. Like if you were to give one very short, quick advice that can be used for like 90% of the time, that's not too bad. Don't give the first number. So if we had 10 seconds to explain it, I was like, yeah, don't give the first number. But if we had a little bit more time, I would say,
yeah, we got more time.
It's about anchoring, right? When you negotiate something, if you can anchor that number down early on, that could be quite good. And you see that in shopping all the time, right? This item is $1,000, but now we're slashing it. It's on sale. It's only $800. So you've anchored it at $1,000. That's the value, the perceived value. And now you're saying we're bringing it down to $800. And you're getting a lot of value out of it. So rather than saying, hey, this is just $800, showing that creates more theoretical value in people's mind.
Something I think is really interesting, maybe worth calling out. There's a lot of people transitioning from, other fields to a very, very, very high paid tech industry. Somebody on the other day on LinkedIn mentioned this, and I think this is maybe worth calling out as a separate thing to talk about, which I think I'm relating this back to anchoring. So give me a second. But they were talking about how they were, I think a social worker or something in the past. And someone said something about, well, this company is offering $35 for UX designer. That's a lot of money for me.
Yeah.
And the thing is, though, that $35 an hour, 40 hours a week, that's $70,000, which is, very low for a UX designer in many, many companies these days. maybe not a junior designer, maybe not somebody starting out, but still, $35 for a social worker seems like an insane amount of money, but for a UX designer, it seems very low. And so that anchor, we're anchoring a certain value and we're saying, well, my old salary was worth this. This is higher than that. So I'm happy with that, even though it's very low for other people. Right? Does that make sense? That's kind of like, I feel like what you're talking about. So anchor it higher. Don't just assume it's that past salary or whatever.
So in that case, you are anchoring, but you're anchoring it internally against yourself.
Right. Too low.
Because you're saying, I'm a social worker. I usually make $15 or $20 an hour. And now you're offering me $35. Whoa, that's like a 80% increase or something. So that's massive. So you're using that reverse anchor in your own mind to talk yourself down in some ways. So there are actually multiple anchors, right? There's an external anchor when two parties negotiate against each other, and then people have internal anchors as well because they have perceptions of what something should be worth. And that anchor, those two anchors can contradict each other or work against each other or actually be in line. And in some ways, in this case, it's in line. So that's a great point. I would say, generally speaking, you want to do as much research as possible, and you don't want to have these mental anchors work against you. There's a reason why it's illegal in the state of New York and California for employers to ask what people made in their previous job or their current job. So if a recruiter or hiring manager were to ask you, what are you making currently, you can actually report them to the labor department, but we'll check on that later, and they can be fined tens of thousands of dollars for breaking that rule. And the reason for that is your past earning should not dictate what you make next. That isn't fair, right? That is a very anti-labor power dynamic.
Well, so let me ask you this. So you mentioned doing a lot of research. People, I'm sure the first thing they think was like, let me go on Indeed or something, and let me check the salary ranges. And when you look at salary ranges, this is something that I've come across as somebody being from the South. I'm originally from New Orleans, right? And I can tell you 10 years ago, before work from home was even a concept for most people, pre-COVID, if you tried to get go look at salaries for something like San Francisco and you brought that to a company and say, well, UX designers make $200,000 in San Francisco. I want $200,000 in New Orleans. And they laugh you out the building. So when you do research and you're looking at these numbers, the markets that we're in, one of the things I always said in New Orleans, well, the cost of living is lower here, You're not paying San Francisco cost of living, so we don't need to pay you as much. How do you do that research? Maybe it's different now, after COVID and when more people are remote and things like that. Is there some advice that you might have on doing that research to actually getting a realistic, salary that isn't completely crazy?
Yeah, how do you even define realistic or not crazy these days? Because the market is so volatile.
Sure.
And there are different ways. I think the general advice is you look online, right? You look at levels.fyi. You look at websites that are aggregating those kind of salary data. And you try to match it to your internal mental model because, Google and Facebook and Amazon and all these other companies are recording that data, or the candidates are reporting that data for these mega-sized companies with enough employees to really show the data across the board. And then you think about how you might be making a little bit less at this mid-sized company in a different locale. So a lot of it is, yes, you need to Google it and to do those kind of website research. One thing I do want to mention is Glassdoor, in my opinion, has always been really, really off.
Really? Okay.
Where the data isn't super applicable. But generally speaking, I truly believe you do need to network and talk to people about what they're making. And that's something that's has been a really touchy topic for a lot of people for a long time. And that's a question of, how much money are you making?
That's something I'm curious from your perspective. Why do you think people care so much about that? Like, I couldn't care less if someone asked me what I made. I especially one of my colleagues, I would straight up tell them and be like, I would tell you, I would fill out an Excel sheet right now and we could post it online and I would be happy to give you that. Why do you feel like that's such a touchy topic? Obviously managers and leadership doesn't want people to share because it's going to highlight the discrepancies, but people that are working, you feel like that's just like, it's been ingrained in us that is bad by leadership, even though it's kind of one of those, I don't know there's probably a word for that, but.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing for sure. Again, like hiring and salary negotiation, it's deeply tied into our culture in many ways. And if we understand that, we can obviously leverage it a little bit better. But we also should call out the inequities that comes from something like that. So, without going too deeply into it, I would say at one point companies were, still, I think companies penalize workers for talking about salary. It's illegal to do so now.
It's illegal to penalize an employee for talking about salary?
Yeah.
Is that a federal thing or is that just like
I believe that's a federal thing. I need to double check on that. But generally speaking, it's companies are not allowed to do that. Now, proving that they did that is a whole different story. So there are just so many ways to punish your workers without any evidence of wrongdoing. But, power dynamics is all obviously very fucked up, in my opinion. But aside from that, it's also seen as ultra competitive in a way. It's like, oh, I'm making more money than you, or you're making more money than me. And, some people do say comparison is a thief of joy, which is true in many ways. But one thing I did notice is that I am an extremely aggressive negotiator. I care very much about it. And it also kind of makes me miserable. Yeah. Really? And I think some of my friends who couldn't care less about this are happier people in general. So one thing I like to offer is like, hey, I will be that miserable person for you. So you could, just keep on enjoying life with extra money. And that's kind of like a pitch as a salary negotiation coach. But
I love it.
Why do people do it? I think it's the same reason why our parents would tell us, hey, you need to put in the footwork and drop off your resumes at every company, in person to show how much you want the job. And beyond that, it's like managers obviously don't like it because I don't think managers are out there trying to screw people over. It's just that our system for determining salary or compensation is not great. And even with the idea of pay bands and leveling, it doesn't really solve it. It just kind of propagates a little bit further, kind of hides it a little bit better. So generally speaking, they don't want you to talk about it for obvious reasons. And I'm not saying this like they're the boogeyman. I'm saying I don't have any solutions for pay equity. It's just really, really hard. Now, can we do better? Absolutely. But there isn't this antidote that would solve it across the board. So yeah, to answer your question, I don't really know. I think there's a lot of cultural things behind it. There's people don't like to compare. People don't want to find out in certain ways. And also it's just deeply, deeply emotional. So when I coach someone, I would say only 20% of my time is spent on the actual techniques, talking about here's what you do, here's what you say, here's what's going to happen next. 80% of it is to work on the emotional aspects because most of the energy and time is not spent on between the candidate and the hiring manager. Because you would imagine that's the case, right? They're negotiating with the hiring manager, with the recruiter. That's where all the energy goes, all the time and stuff. Actually, most of the time and energy is between the coach and the candidate and trying to convince the candidate you should do this because this will create this kind of value for you. And your beliefs and your emotional thoughts around this topic could change a little bit to help facilitate this because that's what's really holding you back. Not the system. System is helping, but ultimately it's these emotional things.
So one of the things I'm curious about, we got a lot of career shifters and things like that listen to this show too. And the interesting thing about career shifters is depending on how long they've been in that previous career. Like for instance, I know of a few people who were teachers or, bankers or whatever it was before they got into UX design. And one of the things that they struggle with, maybe this is an anchoring thing too, but when they think about, the years of experience they have doing a thing before getting into UX design, then when they transition to UX design, they're suddenly juniors, right? With no experience at all. Does a career transitioner, you mentioned this before, where's your value? How does a career transitioner moving to UX position themselves so that they may make more money because, life creep and everything else, but they don't have the experience, but they need more money to live and things like that. But they also have those soft skills and some of the other skills that a junior designer fresh out of school that has no professional experience wouldn't be able to bring to the table. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations on people career shifting to try to increase the number, their salary number, even though they are coming in as a junior and leveraging some of that past experience to make them more valuable?
I was a career transitioner myself, right? I used to be a sculptor, a photographer. I used to do a bunch of different things. I actually came into tech fairly late in my life compared to somebody who would enter it through college. So I think things are constantly changing, and what used to work for me no longer would work for what's happening right now. I think when I was transitioning in, there were way fewer career transitioners. So there is this idea of a unique value proposition. Like I used to be a photographer. I talk to people a lot. I got to build trust. I have to document a story. I have to understand the users. All these things were more useful or more compelling. And I think right now there's a massive exodus from certain fields like teaching, nursing, fields that have historically exploited their workers. And these same workers are now trying to get into tech because the promise is that they will be treated better, be paid a lot more, and their lives would be easier. And that's, I'm all for that. But at the same time, the marketing language from a lot of boot camps and services that cater to juniors is around, hey, you're a career transitioner, all these skills are completely transferable. And some of them, yes, they are transferable. Your patience in working with kids is going to be very useful when you work with stakeholders. But at the same time, if you have the same unique value proposition as every other teacher transitioning in there, and that's not a small, insignificant number, then is that really a unique value proposition? So
It's no longer unique, right?
I think part of it is kind of surveying the field and seeing what other people are saying and not saying that.
Say
Yeah.
something different.
And you really need to understand what people are looking for. And that's actually really hard because that's, getting out of your own head and being in these people with authorities heads, like a recruiter or hiring manager. So you want to speak their language. And I think, this is kind of a non-answer, but you do have a massive advantage as a career transitioner because you do, ideally through your many more years of life on earth, you are probably a little bit better at talking to people. You probably have a little bit more confidence. You probably know how to negotiate a little bit better. You probably know how to hold a conversation, understand the other side. You're more empathetic. So all that is helpful. And you don't have to say it. You just kind of show it as you interview.
So I love that. Yeah, that's interesting too. Like because there are like an insane amount of people. I guess with the proliferation of boot camps, they've made it easier for people to say that they can do UX now, and so everybody's coming on board. And so you've got all these people try to differentiate yourselves. And I love that I love your advice though of just like, instead of saying it, show it. Right? Show, don't tell. I think that's really awesome advice. One thing I'm really curious about, you mentioned before a little bit about, minorities being at a special disadvantage because especially with how cultural, this whole process tends to be. Do you have any tips or advice maybe for minorities specifically to navigate some of this or to help maybe improve their position? Or is there some advice that you might give for minorities that might not apply to everybody?
I mean, I like to give advice after having talked to that individual because I don't think a lot of the advice are applicable to larger groups of people. I think one thing that really does take me off quite a bit is the idea that Asian Americans are quieter, are less likely to speak out about things. And then the responses, and a lot of Asian Americans do say it's like, oh, you gotta like stand up for yourself. You gotta like speak up. You have to put yourself out there. And I find that kind of problematic. Like that kind of annoys me quite a bit when I hear that, especially from other Asian Americans. And my thinking is, if that is the case, then I think as a society or as a workplace, we should be listening to people a little bit better. Like you shouldn't just be waiting for whoever is the loudest person in the room to, be heard and to listen to them and stuff. But it's tough. And I think if I were to give advice, I think the best advice I can give to anyone who's transitioning into tech, regardless of their ethnic background, is you really should be focused on your financial runway, first and foremost, and your mental health. And then you can focus on your skills. And I think most people do it the opposite. And that includes me. I focus primarily on skills. I kept telling myself, if I learn how to use this tool, I learn how to use this technique. I learn how to wireframe, do information architecture, to use animations and stuff, then I would get a job. And that kind of took me on this horrible road where my mental health like nosedived and I put myself in a lot of debt. And had I been kinder to myself and really focused on how I can extend my runway, how I can take a more sustainable long-term view of breaking into tech, then maybe it would have taken a little bit longer, but the road would have been a lot easier and the ramifications would be a lot better. Like it wouldn't be so bad. Like there was some tough years. So and I think that's applicable to everyone. And I think more people should really focus on that. It's super, super important.
Yeah, when you mentioned financial runway, it's interesting because I've spoken with a lot of junior designers or people looking to transition, and they'll end up being so desperate for a UX job that they will literally take anything. Terrible pay, really crappy low UX maturity orgs with people who don't know what they're doing. And the thing I ask myself often is, why wouldn't you just get a job bartending or waiting tables or working in retail that's going to pay you maybe as much? And you're not going to learn all these bad behaviors and you're not going to be stressed out. Like you can continue to look for work as a UX designer while you're waiting tables, while you're working in retail, while you're doing these other things, but you're not going to stress yourself out. You're not going to learn bad behaviors that you think are right and not realize they're wrong until much later, And so it's an interesting idea though that, and I don't, you're right. I think people focus on learning the skills and all these other things. I talk to people sometimes like, yeah, I took on this free project. I'm like, why? To learn UX. I'm like, but what are you going to learn? Like, why are you doing this? Wouldn't you be better off just like getting a job and practicing at home? So that idea of like trying to extend that runway and making yourself, or having money so that you can afford to live your life and not be stressed out, pay your bills. I feel like that's something that always ends up coming last with a lot of people. They get so focused on getting into UX and breaking into UX that they're just like ignore everything else. And I love that you say that. That's such a great insight.
Thank you.
I'm curious. Last thing here, just in general, negotiating tactics and things like that. We talked about, some stuff, but how do we protect ourselves from maybe nefarious, recruiters or people that are just out to like take advantage of us? We always try to assume good intent, but sometimes there are people out there that really do want to, just hit their numbers and just, really couldn't care less about us as humans. Any thoughts on there, how to protect yourself? Anything to look out for?
Yeah, I think a really important thing that most people don't consider when they negotiate is what does it take for you to walk away? And I think everyone's so focused on, okay, what would it take for me to say yes? They don't really focus on at what point, what's the threshold where I walk away from this? And I think that's super important because if you don't decide that early on, your emotional state will compel you to make decisions that are not in your best interest. And I think one example, and this is how I realized it for my own life, is I used to do a lot of eBaying. I go on eBay, I would buy a lot of shit and sell a lot of shit. And I realized early on that the traditional way of me looking at an auction and waiting for it to count down to the last few seconds and making a bid, which is called bid sniping, because that's like a way for you to save money is to enter the bid at the last second.
Sure, yeah.
The problem with that was I often would overbid for things because I really wanted to win. And there are even studies on this where people would bid on money. They would pay our gift cards.
What? Just to get,
They
just
would
to say you won. Yeah.
pay $21 for a $20 gift card because they really wanted to win. Like I shit you not. Like I was literally doing that. And that's something that's very explicit, right? There's a money is completely fungible. 20 is 20. But when you have actual tangible goods, like say your skills as a designer, your output, the designs you're making, or even things that you can buy. Because I was buying cameras and shit. I was overpaying for them. And one thing that changed everything for me was to use a sniping service where I would enter in the maximum amount that I would pay for an item ahead of time. And then they would automatically bid for me, right? So that was great because it allowed me to create a system where I was making very logical decisions. And while I was winning fewer auctions, over time, the system allowed me to make and save a lot more money. Because when people look at salary negotiation or offers, they kind of see it as a life or death situation. Like if they can't get this offer to work out, everything's over. But instead, they have to look at it in terms of their career. And this one offer is actually just a minor blip. And of course, I'm saying this with the privilege of, having savings or other opportunities. But generally speaking, each offer is smaller in terms of impact than most people think. And if you can decide how much money it would take for you to walk away ahead of time, that's a massive advantage because you're making that decision without emotional impact without the emotions working against you.
Well, it's like you mentioned before, taking emotions out of it, just having that up front, ready to go. It kind of gets you to the point where you're not trying to just win this yes, at any means, and I think that's kind of the analogy you're making, right? Is I want them to send me an offer, and so I will do whatever I can. I'll negotiate down and down and down and down and down until it's no longer worth it for me to take this job. But having some ceiling or floor, I guess in this case, I'm not, for whatever reason it is, and it's interesting too because it might not always be monetary
Yeah.
compensation, right? It could be something you found out this company did something in the news and you didn't like how they're treating, people or the environment or they're polluting or, whatever it is. You found out that the manager is a total dirtbag or something, and you don't want to work for that person. So it's interesting. It could just be anything almost. It doesn't have to necessarily be, salary.
Yeah. The term Pyrrhic victory. Is it Pyrrhic victory? Pyrrhic or Pyrrhic victory? Just use the
Pyrrhic? I think it's
soundbite that's
Pyrrhic.
more correct
I
later
always said
on.
Pyrrhic.
And yeah, but
We'll
like
fix it in post.
people treat the offer as a all-encompassing thing when it's just one battle of many in this war. That's your career in a way. And that's actually a very aggressive look on it. But
you mentioned this too a little bit before, and I just want to kind of recap it, come back to it. You mentioned networking, and a lot of people talk about networking and stuff, to find a job and to get an interview. But I think there's something worth calling out there. You're talking about also continue networking to find out what people might make there. What skills are they looking for? What does that company value? And how do you talk about yourself or enter those negotiations with a place of where you are valued more because you know what they're looking for versus coming in completely blind and just totally guessing, And a lot of people, I feel like they aren't looking at networking in that sense. Once they get the interview, they're like, oh, I can stop networking now, but really, I think to your point, ask them, all kinds of questions, figure out what they want, figure out what skills they value, figure out what problems they have and how you can solve them. What unique things can you bring to the table? And you would never know that if you just stopped talking to people. And I wanted to recapture that towards the end and call it out. I think that's a really great tip for networking.
yeah, and it's fucking batshit insane that UX designers who are highly experienced and skilled at user research and understanding the users, understanding people before you put pen down on paper, do not apply the same principles to highly important things like salary negotiation or job offers or job seeking. And they kind of just go into it blind or with very little preparation. Just insane. But networking is like a term that's overused in a bit or misused. And it's so similar to like politics, right?
It's a dirty word too. People hate it.
Really, it's just talking to people, building trust, and learning more so that you can speak the same language.
Now, to that point too, I think this is something else worth calling out as it relates to salary negotiations and interviewing and things like that. But, this is, again, something I see this all the time, and I try to tell people this, and I don't know how often it clicks, and I hope it clicks for some. But, you treat your website and your case studies like a UX project, right? Like you've got a set of users. And in this case, in the case of negotiating salary and interviewing, which leads up to that, it's about understanding who your users are, the pain points they have, the problems they have, and how you can actually solve them. And if you could figure out what they want by networking before you get the interview, you can speak to it in that interview so that when you get to the negotiation piece, you seem more valuable, right? And it even goes back all the way up to creating that case study. You can't create a case study to solve that company's problems if you don't even know what they're looking for, and you could create a generic case study all day long, but the chances of that being valuable to anybody in these negotiations is probably pretty low. So, that's something too, but you can't do that until you go out and you talk to people and figure out what they want. I think that's something worth calling out. We could probably spend a whole freaking episode about that alone, Hank.
This is one hill that I would like to die on, which is people tend to hire other people that they're comfortable with, more so than really the right candidate for the job or somebody who's able to do the work at hand the best. And really, it's about comfort more than anything else. And they will rationalize it to the end of days. And I think for whatever reason, we tend to miss out on that as designers. Like we make case studies or resumes based on what we see other people do. It's like a competitive analysis in a way, instead of actually talking to the users and understanding them. It's unfortunate, but here we are.
I agree, man. I totally agree. Well, I think your advice today, hopefully this conversation is going to help a lot of people out there, especially junior UXers and career transitioners to hopefully get out of that rut. Stop thinking about yourself and stop thinking about however you're thinking about yourself today and start thinking about yourself as the value that you can bring. Do your research, get out there. I love the Banta framework. I'd never heard of that before. But that's really interesting. Figuring out what you're like when you want to walk away. You know, what's going to lead me to just get out of here and say, nope, no thanks, I'm done. I think that's really important. And the biggest one maybe, I think, from today's conversation is try to figure out how to get the emotions out of it. You know, you don't want to bring emotions to this. And your example of the lawyer, you know, coming in and getting all fired up in a case is probably not going to help them from the jury's perspective. So, you know, try to figure out how you can get the emotions out of it, bring the facts, get the research, do your homework, and speak to the value that you can bring to that specific company. Anything else that we didn't get to cover that you think is worth talking about today, Hang?
We covered a lot. Yeah.
We nailed it. Right on. We nailed it. All right. So we've got you for a little bit of time. Do you have time to answer a few questions for our guests out there to get to know Hang Shu a little bit
almost
better?
10 more minutes.
All right. Right on. I think we could do in 10 minutes. All right. So I got a few questions here. First thing that comes to your head, you don't have to get too philosophical with it. What is your favorite non-design book?
Ooh, non-design book.
Is it The Art of the Deal? Just kidding.
Close. That's number 2. Oh, man.
Anything by Donald Trump.
I really like The God of Small Things. Yeah.
God of Small Things.
It's
What is that?
a book by Indian author Arundhati Roy. Hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And it's probably the favorite book I read in school.
All right. I've never heard of it, but I'm going to check it out. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
Oof. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but I did really like, oh my God, I have to Google this. It's a science one on public radio.
There's a lot.
Yeah. God, let's skip this question because
Science Fridays.
Let's skip this question. I haven't listened.
Skip. Pass.
Because I haven't listened to podcasts in so long. Oh, wait. No, I know. Sisters.
What is it?
Yeah.
Sisters.
Okay,
what's that
It's about 2 sisters. And I met the woman who produced it randomly at a book signing and then dinner afterwards. And our mutual friend said, you know, she has a podcast. And I listened to it and I was like, wow, this is beautifully made. And the story is it's just a beautiful story.
I love a good podcast that tells a good story, like Radio Lab and all that stuff like that. They do a fantastic job. All right. What is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something your grandma cooked, could be a restaurant you went to. Favorite meal?
There used to be this restaurant called Uogashi, Uogashi, on the, God, fuck, what is it called? It's like 40 something. You're not from New York City, so.
I've been there. Lived there for a summer.
I can't remember the neighborhood name right now, but it's a sushi restaurant and you go inside and you just feel like you're in Japan. And they closed a few months ago and it's made me really upset.
Oh,
but you know, getting the omakase there is like, it's my favorite thing in the world.
All right. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Ooh. I would say Hangzhou in China. Went there a few years ago. I actually grew up there, but it changed so much that when I came back, I was like, wow, it's just a really beautiful place. And there's a really beautiful lake and there's some mountains in the background, but it's just so scenic and so calming. And you feel really at peace there, which is something that's really hard for me to do in New York City.
Yeah, I imagine. I don't know why. The subway doesn't do it for you, I guess.
Kyoto as well is also really beautiful. I highly recommend people to, if you were to go to Japan, definitely go to Kyoto as well. And Hangzhou in China is really beautiful.
All right, right on. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Oof. I mean, Photoshop for many years. I don't know how many hours I spent on that tool and realized at one point I was like, oh, I'm really good at this tool. And then later on realized, hey, I really just knew like 30% of it. And yeah,
there's so much.
involved. And, I think nothing beats a pen as well.
Nothing beats a pen. I'm with you, man. I'm the same way. Pen and paper, that's me. I didn't get to ask you about whether or not Boston Dynamics let you ride the dog robot. That was maybe the topic for another.
You can't ride it. It's a tiny robot. Like I would completely crush them. I wouldn't crush it.
I thought they were big. They look so big on video.
They're the size of like a mid-sized dog.
They look so big. Oh, really? Because on the videos, they look so big. They look like horses.
No, they're pretty small. There is a video though, and this is an internal video, I believe, where a person was standing on a round table, and there were about like 8 dogs underneath carrying this person.
Wow. Oh, dude, I would love to see that. If that's not on YouTube, I don't want you to break any international laws or anything, but I'd love to see that video.
What video?
Yeah, for some reason I thought those things were like the size of like a horse. I would just imagine people like riding them all the time. Oh well, I'm glad they're not the size of horses, because those robots are honestly somewhat terrifying.
I don't know why people think it's terrifying. Like there are these guides about how to disable the robot, and really you could just go up and like kick it. Like any small child can probably beat up the robot without any difficulty.
It's when they start adding arms and they can like press buttons and do things and manipulate things. I think that's what terrifies me. All right, Hang. Well, that was it, man. We've had you for quite a bit today. I really appreciate you coming on. Before you get out of here, anything you want to plug? Do you want to give a shout out to Collective Supply, or where can we find you on LinkedIn, any of that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Collective Supply, collective.supply is the URL, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Check out Collective Supply if you're hiring for designers, or if you're a designer yourself with more than 5 years of experience. Love to talk to you and work with you.
Right on. All right, man. Awesome. Well, Hang, I really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks so much, Jeremy. I'll see you around, man.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Hang and me for today. I hope we helped shed a little bit of light on hiring and salary negotiations and all that stuff. But I'm curious, have you tried any of these tips that Hang has talked about today? And I'm curious, did you not do any of the things that Hang mentioned but get totally screwed over? Or the opposite? I'd love to know what's worked for you. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out way more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. And if you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there are some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker that you've seen all over the internet. You can get a shout out on the show every week, and there's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. And don't forget to head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to download crucial conversations, tools for talking when stakes are high. Sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial, cancel at any time, and the book is yours to keep forever. And in case you forgot, I've partnered with audible.com, so anytime you sign up for a free trial, you'll help support the show. There's no obligation, and you can cancel at any time, and the audiobook is yours to keep forever. So get a free audiobook on me and help support the show. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes, along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer, because there's more to UX than design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. If I think you fell asleep or something, I'll buzz you or something.
Okay.
Kids are absolutely awful. They really are.